Wow, absolutely crazy footage coming out of Ukraine, and who would have thought? Even Russian fighter pilot jets need dash cams in their vehicles. Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings. This is Okudowski here of WeAreChange.org, and we have a lot of very serious news to get into today, as of course there's a lot of things happening here domestically inside of the United States that show a very troubling sign for political discourse, similar to, of course, to what just happened in China. Are we there yet? Well, we're going to be asking that question later on today, as well as, more importantly, giving you a bigger update on the proxy conflict between, of course, the East and the West. Lots of crazy news to get into there. Lots of corruption, crazy predictions by Dr. Doom, and now, as of today, in the making of this video, Russia warning about, quote, uncontrolled escalations. What are they talking about? Well, we're going to be describing that plus a lot more here in this independent media broadcast. But before we begin, the clip that we played in the beginning of this broadcast was a clip that I just saw on Reddit being shared around widely of a Russian Su-25 fighter jet being shot down over Ukraine. Crazy footage, insane footage, giving you a small window to see the intensity of war that a lot of people face there every single day. Insanity brought to us by politicians that, of course, are taking your money and then blowing up fighter jets with them. Very expensive fighter jets, just like very expensive San Francisco public bathrooms, as we found out today from the local Fox affiliate in San Francisco, that the city there is building one single public toilet that will cost the taxpayer there $1.7 million, and to add insult to injury, won't even be completed until 2025. This showing you the perfect representation of a big bureaucratic state that loves to spend your money, as the representative from that very corrupted, bureaucratic, mafia-esque jurisdiction came out today, one of the richest people in the world, one of the best stock traders, better than Warren Buffett himself, Nancy Pelosi, came out and literally tried to say that we need to change the subject on inflation. Inflation that, of course, is caused by governments printing money, spending money that they don't have, which, of course, devalues the purchasing power of the dollar because there's too many in circulation that the government just willy-nilly prints out of nowhere. Actions partly orchestrated by Nancy Pelosi, who said this today.
Is that when I hear people talk about inflation, as I heard him there, we have to change that subject.
Yeah, that would be very convenient, as, of course, inflation has hit so high that even family members are demanding trillions of dollars, specifically $2.7 trillion from a radio talk show host that dared to express some opinions that I personally didn't agree with myself, statements and assertions I didn't agree with myself, but I think it's fair to say that it's a bit egregious to be penalized nearly $1 billion, with other parties now demanding $2.7 trillion for simply expressing unpopular ideas. As of course, a lot of people see this as a mainly politically motivated trial, just like the trial of Steve Bannon, another individual who was just sentenced to 4 months in prison for the crime of being held contempt of Congress. Now, it's also important to note that a lot of people routinely are held in contempt of Congress. Bill Maher, Eric Holder, Janet Reno, Henry Kissinger, to name a few, and yet they never were sentenced, never went on trial, and never punished, just like Steve Bannon was and sent to a jail for 4 months for what is shaping up to be a political show trial, just like they have in China, where the Communist Political Party faithfully just endorsed Xi Jinping's core policies and positions while approving a sweeping reshuffling that not only had his rival step down, but literally be escorted out of the building. This, as of course the current president of China was just reelected for a third term and most likely will be the leader of China for many years to come, as of course he is galvanizing control of that country under his thumb. This, as of course many multinational Western corporations and billionaire thought leaders usually like to congratulate and thank China for all the work that they've been doing and see them as an inspiration for a society that they're trying to set up here. Will they be successful? Well, I think it's worth asking, will you allow this to happen? Will you speak out against this, or will you be silenced? Well, that's a question that I think a lot of people should be asking themselves, as I think it's fair to say that we're slowly ever encroaching a Chinese totalitarian society that, of course, tries to stifle out any kind of critical thinking, which perfectly represents the shirt that I'm wearing right now, which you could get on thebestpoliticalshirts.com. And because you do, this is why we exist as an independent media organization, and more importantly, this provides you an outlet to express ideas where you cannot be censored online. In the real world, in the supermarket, at the grocery store, at the pharmacy, wherever you go, you can meet like-minded individuals, find new friends, build a community. Hopefully that's very optimistic of me to say, but more importantly, express political ideas that might get someone to think. And I think the more we could get people to think, the more we could normalize critical thinking, like the shirt that I'm wearing right now, the better off we will be, and the better we could ward off a lot of the centralized, totalitarian, 1984 dystopian policies that could only be set in place with ignorance and secrecy. To me, you could fight all that, be a part of the conversation, do your form of lazy activism just by simply purchasing a shirt, and hey, it directly goes towards supporting this independent media outlet. So if you like this show, this is one way of supporting us. And if you haven't checked out thebestpoliticalshirts.com, what are you doing? Click the link down in the description below, and I bet you will probably have fun scrolling through the many list of products that we have available for you on our store. We just added 2 new shirts that are getting a lot of attention. Check them out down in the description below. Now, very interestingly, CBS News came out with a report just moments ago talking about how the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Unit is practicing for a war with Russia just miles away from the Ukrainian border. And in this specific video report, they detailed that these drills, these practices are, quote, not just about defending NATO territory, and then went on to detail how specifically the U.S. military is, quote, fully prepared to cross over into Ukrainian territory, leaving a lot of people watching this news broadcast saying to themselves, why? Why are we doing this? What's the strategy here? What's the geopolitical objective? What's the larger goal here? Well, I haven't heard any, especially when it comes from the U.S. military leaders, especially when it comes to the politicians setting up these policies, setting up these war games, setting up these drills, sending tons of weaponry into a conflict that represents a larger proxy conflict, and with more arms being sent, the more likelihood that this conflict will be prolonged. And with this prolonging of this conflict faces a lot of consequences. Consequences that I think a lot of Americans should be asking themselves, as of course there is a lot of corruption with all the parties involved here, specifically the Ukrainians, the Russians, which the Biden family has been doing extensive business deals with to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. Hunter Biden's real estate company received $40 million in investment from a Russian oligarch. Joe Biden's son was working for Burisma Oil, a nationalized energy company in Ukraine that clearly was spending way too much money for him for unspecified, unknown reasons. So when aggressive policies are put into play and there's no reason for them actually given, we should be asking ourselves what's really going on here, as of course there's a high degree of corruption being possible here. This, as of course there's a lot of stake here, as even an NYU economics professor and CEO of a consulting company is coming out today and predicting a nuclear attack from Russia, specifically impacting one of America's largest cities, New York City. This Dr. Doom specifically saying that this is going to happen within the next 2 decades. By the way, this is also the same man who 16 years ago correctly predicted the collapse of the housing market and the emerging of a worldwide recession, which he's been right about. And we have to ask ourselves, is this Dr. Doom being a negative Nancy, or is he reading the writing on the walls? Well, only time will tell, and we'll be able to find out if his prediction was accurate. And all of this is happening as, very interestingly, there has been a lot of communication between Russia and the United States, with specific phone calls between the defense ministers and secretaries. All of this as there has been a lot of chatter and conversations specifically about false flag attacks. Russia is saying the United States and Ukraine will set one off, while of course the United States is saying Russia will set one off. As of course specifically there's a talk of of a major dam being destroyed in the south of Ukraine, which would flood a major portion of the territory there, unleashing what is being described as 8 million tons of water, which of course would negatively affect the energy sector of Ukraine, which already is being targeted and hit by the Russians, as already 1/3 of the power grid in Ukraine has been taken offline, as we're also finding out that 90% of wind power, solar power facilities have been destroyed during this large conflict, which I want to talk about in just a little bit, as of course it's also important to note here that as of today the Russians are making new allegations as they are informing a bunch of Western nations that Ukraine will plan to, quote, detonate a dirty nuclear bomb on its territory. Ukraine is, of course, denying this larger allegation, but whether these allegations are true or not, they are paving the groundwork for what is clearly the larger possibility of a nuclear bomb going off in that country, which of course would change things very dramatically. With specifically the Russian defense minister coming out and saying that the situation in Ukraine is deteriorating and, quote, trending towards uncontrolled escalations, and whether it's going to be a false flag attack, a real attack, we don't know exactly what's happening. There's a thing called fog of war. Truth is usually the first casualty of war, but seeing this rhetoric, seeing the groundwork being laid down, highlights some very troubling news when it comes to this entire conflict, which is sure bound to be escalated, as there is no one and nothing trying to de-escalate it. Right now, I think it's fair to say that we're seeing a war of attrition being launched against the Ukrainians and the Russians. The Russians specifically are now having their supply of Iranian drones being targeted, as we're learning today that there was an Israeli-linked airstrike that hit an Iranian drone factory. Iranian drones that have been having a lot of success for the Russians inside of Ukraine. The Russians have been predominantly targeting the infrastructure now of Ukraine, and regardless of what your political perspective is or where you stand on this issue or who you're rooting for, it doesn't matter. I think it's fair to say that this is absolutely insane, unnecessary. What's the purpose here? What's the goal here? Why aren't there any de-escalations? Why aren't there any negotiations? There's none of that, and I think it's fair to say that we are on a pathway that makes you consider that Dr. Doomsday might not be that far off when it comes to his far-fetched prediction that we talked about earlier in this broadcast. What do you think? Is he being a negative Nancy? Or is he being realistic? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Press 1 if you think negative Nancy. Press 2 if you think he's seeing things correctly here on the ground. I'm very curious to see what you guys think. He definitely is providing some very interesting perspectives on this entire topic, which I think we should realize when it comes to the larger circumstances involving everything and everyone when it comes to this proxy war. What will happen from here? What will go on? What will be the next step? Well, we're going to be following that very closely here, doing our best to try to report on this as fairly as we can. If you thought we did a good job on that, share this video with your friends and family members, even just copying the URL, going through the message boards, scrolling down in Messenger or whatever it is, send it to a random person. Because you do that, I'm still here. If you disagreed with any of my opinions, assertions, or perspectives, hey, let me know down in the comment section below. I always appreciate constructive criticism, and I'm here essentially for you. And the more that I can engage with you, the more that I can find out from you, the better the situation. That's just my perspective, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, and this is why I love you guys. Stay tuned for more here on WeAreChange.org.